Okay, let's talk about the book of Revelation. Just saying the name brings up all these wild images, right? Dragons, plagues, the end of the world, stuff that's both super fascinating and, let's be honest, kind of terrifying. It's confused people for centuries. But what if? What if we've all been trying to unlock it with the wrong key? Well, today, we're going to try and find the right one.
The first thing that probably pops into your head? That number, 666. It's become this universal shorthand for evil, right? The number of the beast. And yep, it comes straight out of this book.
And then, of course, there's the Antichrist, that shadowy, powerful figure who shows up right at the end of everything. This one idea has fueled so many books and movies, it's incredible. And you can't forget Armageddon, the big one, the final, epic showdown between good and evil that decides, everything. These aren't just obscure religious ideas anymore. They're literally everywhere in our culture.
But hang on a second. Here's the big question that's going to drive this whole explainer. What if Revelation isn't a crystal ball predicting our future? What if the people who first read it understood it completely differently, as a message about their world, their time? So to even begin to answer that, we got to start with our first big clue, the author. The book kicks off by saying, hey, my name's John. Okay, but who was this John and what was going on in his life? Figuring that out is absolutely the first step to decoding this whole thing.
Well, John actually tells us right where he is. He's on this little island called Patmos. And trust me, he's not there for the sunshine and beaches. When he writes that he's there for the Word of God, that's first century code for I've been exiled. He's a political prisoner of the Roman Empire.
See, getting banished to a remote island like Patmos, that was Rome's go-to punishment for a very specific list of offenses, things like practicing magic or astrology, and, get this, prophecy. Because think about it, if you're a prophet running around saying that some guy named Jesus is the true king of the world and not Caesar, well, to Rome, that isn't just a religious opinion, that's treason. John wasn't just some weirdo having visions, he was a genuine threat to the Roman government.
Now, for the longest time, pretty much everyone just assumed this was John the Apostle, one of the original 12 disciples. But here's where it gets interesting. Modern scholars have looked at the text and said, wait a minute, the Greek is really different, the style, the vocabulary, it just doesn't quite match the Gospel of John. So today, most scholars lean toward the idea that this was a different John, maybe a church elder known as John the Presbyter. The key takeaway here is we know his name was John, but who he was exactly, that's still one of the big mysteries. Okay, so we've got a political prisoner named John, but that still doesn't explain why he wrote this crazy book, right? All the dragons and monsters and weird visions. Well, this brings us to the second, and maybe the most important key to unlocking Revelation. He was writing in a very specific style, a literary genre that was like a secret handshake for his original readers. It was their own special decoder ring.
He was writing what's called an apocalypse. And I know, when we hear that word, we immediately think end of the world, fire and brimstone. But the original Greek word apocalypsis just means an unveiling or a revelation. This was a super common way for Jewish and Christian writers to communicate, especially when they were being persecuted. It was, at its heart, a coded language of hope.
And this style of writing, it had a playbook. It followed a pretty clear formula. It wasn't about predicting the stock market 2,000 years from now. No, scholars call it a tract for hard times. It was written to answer the one question that was on everyone's mind. If we're God's people, why are we suffering so much under this brutal empire? It basically reframes their entire situation as a huge cosmic battle that, spoiler alert, God was definitely going to win.
Okay, so let's connect the dots here. We have a political prisoner writing in a secret coded language to give hope to a persecuted community. The next logical question is, who was persecuting them? Well, the answer is blindingly obvious when you remember who the one and only superpower on the planet was at the time. Rome, the Roman Empire.
You see, Rome wasn't just about legions and roads. It was an absolute propaganda machine. I'm talking coins, giant statues, and a whole state religion built around the emperor. And all of it blasted out one single, relentless message. Rome is forever, Caesar is God, and our power is absolute. And once you see Revelation as a direct shot back at that propaganda, everything starts to click. It's almost like a point-by-point takedown. Rome says, worship the emperor. Revelation says, no, only the Lamb. Jesus is worthy. Rome's symbol of victory is the mighty eagle of Jupiter. Revelation has an eagle too, but it's flying around crying woe to the world. Roman coins stamped you as a subject of Caesar. Revelation says true believers get a seal from God. It's incredible, right? He's fighting their symbols with his own.
Just as the theologian Lucas Burgel says, John basically took all the symbols of Roman power and just flipped them completely on their head. He was creating a counter-propaganda piece. He was telling his readers, look, I know what you see around you. I know it looks like Rome is winning. But the real king, the true victor, isn't the guy on the throne in Rome. It's the crucified lamb in heaven.
Okay, so now that we have all that context, the author, the history, the literary style, we can finally understand why there are so many different ways to interpret this book. It really all comes down to which clues you focus on, and, crucially, when you think all this stuff is supposed to happen.
In a massive piece of this puzzle is the date. When exactly did John write this? Was it around 65 AD, just before the Romans sacked Jerusalem? Or was it later, around 95 AD? This isn't just some boring academic debate. It's a huge deal, because the date totally changes who you might see as the main villain. Now, while there's still some debate, the testimony from the early church, from guys who are basically a student of John himself, points to that later date, and that's where most scholars land today.
All right, another huge fork in the road for interpreters is this thing called the millennium. It's a 1,000-year reign of Christ that gets mentioned in chapter 20. So the big question is that a literal 1,000 years? Is it just a symbol? Is it something that's still going to happen, or is it happening right now? How you answer that question pretty much determines which of the four main camps you fall into.
Okay, so let's quickly break down these four major views. First up, you have preterism. Preterists believe most of the wild stuff in Revelation already happened, way in the past, mainly with the destruction of Jerusalem back in 70 AD. Then you've got futurism, which is probably the one you're most familiar with. This is the view that all the action is still to come, right before the end of the world. The third view is historicism, which sees the book as a symbolic roadmap of the entire history of the church, from John's day all the way to ours. And last, there's idealism. This view says, hey, maybe it's not about specific events at all, but a timeless, symbolic story about the constant battle between good and evil.
So let's just recap the big takeaways here. Revelation was penned by a guy named John, who was exiled by the Romans. He used this special coded style called apocalyptic literature, not to scare people, but to give them hope. A lot of that code was aimed squarely at Roman propaganda, flipping it on its head. And finally, how you read the book today really just depends on which of those four big lenses, past, future, all of history, or symbolic, you choose to look through.
Which really brings us back to the ultimate question, doesn't it? What is Revelation? Is it a history book about the first century? Is it a newspaper headline from the future? Or is it something else? A timeless, powerful symbol of hope written to encourage anyone who's ever felt oppressed, assuring them that in the end, good wins. You know, maybe the real power of the book is that it manages to be all of those things at the same time.